which teams are looking the quickest after F1 2024 winter testing. It's over. 3 days of Formula 1 winter testing in Bahrain. We've got the data, we've got the numbers, and now we're going to analyse who is going to be the teams at the top, who's going to be in the middle, and who is going to be praying for the season to finish. All of that and more to come in today's video. But before we start, before we get going, we must point out that it is testing. And we all know that testing all of the data, you've got to take with a pinch of salt. Because we've got no idea what fuel loads, what engine modes these teams are using. They're all going to sandbag, which means they're going to hold back a lot of data and information about their cars, not to give too much away to their fellow opponents. So even though we can take a lot from testing, we're not going to know the true picture until Friday night for qualifying. Yes, quali is on Friday this week and the race is next Saturday. Just 1 week until the lights go out. But we got to start them with the team that dominated in 2024. And we've got to ask the question, is it going to happen again? And testing went very well for Red Bull Racing, and I can hear it now. Some of you sighing, some of you thinking, no, please, that's not what we want to hear, Dan. But unfortunately, unless you're a Red Bull fan, of course, it went very, very well. The third most laps of anybody throughout the test, 390 across the 3 days, 50 less than the most. However, 390 is still a very, very high score. And what's more impressive with that is that there are almost no problems throughout their running. There were a few hiccups here and there, and on day 2 it looked like Sergio Perez was having a slight problem coming into the pit lane, but we never really heard anything of that, and it was pretty much smooth sailing for the Red Bull team. And on race pace, tyre deg and quali pace, it looks like they're the team to beat across all 5 tyre compounds. That's scary. That is ridiculously scary. It's a very different looking car this year, and that can go one of 2 ways. Either they slip closer into that chasing pack, or they extend their gap. And considering that the atmosphere within the team seems very buoyant, everyone seems very, very confident, and again, looking at the reliability of that car, with the times they were being able to achieve on all of the range of compounds, it looks like they're going into this season favourites once again. And Max Verstappen, even though we're in testing, still looks like he's got the edge over Sergio Perez. But who's going to be chasing? What teams are in the hunt? Because though Red Bull appear to be on the front foot heading into the season, we probably could have guessed that before testing. And I would argue at the end of last year, the team that were the closest were McLaren. And their winter test went a little bit different to Red Bull. Now, McLaren managed to achieve only 327 laps. It's not all that far off Red Bull's 390, but that's a Grand Prix distance behind Red Bull, and it was the second least of anybody. McLaren did have their issues as well on that second day, only managing to get 97 laps. A few technical issues behind closed doors. But what alarms me most about McLaren is that despite them looking quick at the end of last year, despite the fact they had a terrible test last year and were able to claw it back, confidence seems really low. And when you look at their estimated race pace, they look about 1.1 seconds off Red Bull in race pace. Tyre deg, they look okay. They look very similar to Red Bull. And in quali, that seems to be their strength going into this year. Those quali runs, they look about 3/10 behind Red Bull. A little bit back from where they were at the end of last year. And McLaren traditionally are a team that go into testing and normally try to hide their pieces a little bit, not try to give too much away, but they're not happy with their test. And I think they're not the team that are going to be the closest to Red Bull next weekend. I think that may come in the form of Ferrari, who managed to put in more laps than the Red Bull team, 416, one of just 2 teams to get over 400 laps. They had no reliability issues, and in quali trim, in their quali runs, they appear to be just a couple of tenths behind that Red Bull car. which is a big step forward from where they were last year. Now, in my ones to watch video, I spoke about that Charles Leclerc in particular had a really strong end to 2023, 3 pole positions in the last 5 races, a real testament to that. And from those numbers in testing so far, they appear to be the closest, maybe not quite as close as Mercedes on race trim, but the problem with these Mercedes cars is that their qualifying pace doesn't look great. And it's testing, I know. You've always got to take it with a pinch of salt. But looking at those tyre comparisons when they're on the same tyre and on a similar run plan, Mercedes look about half a second off that Red Bull. And that's what's really alarming there. And looking at their tyres at the end of a run, Mercedes seem to have far more tyre degradation than that Red Bull and that Ferrari. And so, though Mercedes' race pace looks really strong, their long runs were really good, by the end of those long runs, they'd used up more tyres than teams around them. And again, that quali pace, it looks like they've got 4 or 5 teams potentially in front of them. So Mercedes could, if they can just get quali right, they could definitely be in the mix. And that other team that was at the front last year was Aston Martin. And they kind of went on a trajectory last year where they went backwards, fell through the field. However, from the data we've got in testing so far, they look like they're back in that mix with that chasing pack, shall we call them, because it's not a midfield. You can't have Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes and Aston Martin, all of which fought for victories last year, and I think will do so again this year. You can't call them the midfield when they're that close. So let's call them the chasing pack. I think Aston are still there. The 4th most laps of anyone, 379. Very smooth running. Don't forget, this time last year, Lance Stroll was out. He didn't take part in testing because he broke his wrist. They had Felipe Drugovich in. He was in the car this year with Fernando Alonso. Very smooth running. I would probably say, of all the teams, they're the team I've heard the least from. Very quiet. I think quietly confident, though, that they've got another strong car this year. In terms of race pace, they look similar to Ferrari, better than McLaren. Quali pace, they look like they're in that mix with the Mercedes, with the Ferrari. And in terms of tyre degradation, they look almost identical to Red Bull. Tyre deg's definitely the hardest one to judge, but so far they look very, very close. And so that chasing pack, your Astons, your Ferraris, McLarens, Mercedes, very, very close. And I think the team then following them is going to be the Racing Bulls, who of all the teams on the grid look like they've made the biggest step. And this isn't a surprise. A big rebrand for the team, not only in terms of colours and name, but also a brand new team principal. Laurent Mekies coming from Ferrari. We've got a revitalised Daniel Ricciardo, a Yuki Tsunoda with a point to prove. But more than any of that, the team itself has moved from Faenza to the UK and is having a much closer working relationship with Red Bull. And so far, looking at their test, which again was a really strong test from another Red Bull based car, 366 laps, more than Mercedes, more than Alpine, McLaren and Williams. They were putting in consistently quick laps, managed to put in a flashy time at the end of day 3 with Yuki Tsunoda. They look in the mix in quali pace. I don't think they're going to be challenging that chasing pack. But actually, on their day, maybe could be managed to nip in front of an Aston. Maybe get in front of a McLaren. On their day, I think they're capable of doing that. And again, they've got 2 drivers hungry there that are capable of pulling off those results. So they seem to be that first midfield team. Followed then by, I think, Alpine, another team that are really hard to judge. A quiet test for them. They managed to do 333 laps, so not too many compared to some of their rivals. But Alpine, a team that have just kind of floated into obscurity and were the only team in the midfield, I would argue, last year. Not as quick as that chasing pack, but definitely quicker than your Williams, your Haas, your Alfa Romeo, and of course your Alfa Tauri. They seem to be in that same spot, in that rut of the midfield. No flashy times for them, no reliability issues, which is great, but just not a lot of oomph. Not a lot of really strong data suggesting they're going to be at the front. That's not going to happen this year for Alpine. They've stayed very similar with their car concept this year, and you just wonder whether they've got something big brewing behind closed doors somewhere at Enstone, because right now it's looking like another nothingy season from Alpine. Behind them, I think it's then Williams. Another strong car they've built. They were pretty much the only team to run into a major issue, and that was right on day one, Alex Albon pulling over with what's being described as an electrical fuel pressure issue. That's a real mouthful. That was the only real problem from their test. Car looks quick, still not going to be moving forward into those glory days, even in the start of the hybrid era in 2014. We're not back to there, but I think it's going to be a continuation of last year. They've changed their steering wheel, is probably their biggest headline from the test, and the mounted wheel screen that wasn't on their steering wheel is now positioned on the steering wheel, is the best way I can describe that in layman's terms. If you're new to F1, that'll mean absolutely nothing, but if you know, you know. So that's a big change for Williams, but James Vowles, new team principal last year, really pushed them in the right direction. I'm feeling that again this year, just building that consistency, and their target is going to be to stay ahead of Stake F1, used to be known as Alfa Romeo, but also Haas. And these two teams, to me, appear to be the rear end of our grid. The Stake car, actually, which I wasn't a huge fan of when it was first unveiled, looked really cool. Looked really cool out on track. It really stood out, and I hope that comes across in these pictures. But nothing special from them, and that's not a huge surprise. They've got a couple of years now just to kind of be there. And that's a really awful thing to say, but they're gearing up for 26 when Audi eventually arrive. They've got an okay package, but it's not going to be causing many teams too many headaches, I would suspect, this year. Bottas and Joe, they've got big years, both of them. They want to stay for that Audi project. So there's a storyline in there that both of these drivers, if they can put on the performances of their life, they could eventually end up with a very handy seat indeed, but not a great test for them. No problems, but again, nothing flashy. Nothing that's making me go, wow, they're going to be quick. And finally, Haas F1, who on paper appear to be the slowest, and you just feel, when is it going to go right for this team? 2018 now is a long time ago, and they've just been this yo-yo team where they slowly begin to get it right. I mean, last year in Austria, don't forget, Nico Hülkenberg was running second place in that sprint race. Yes, they didn't have the race pace to carry it through, and that was their storyline throughout the entirety of 2024. New team principal in Ao Komatsu this year, someone who's been a part of that team since its conception, moving with Romain Grosjean from Lotus, as it was at the time, to Haas F1. He knows the team very well, and I think actually might be a shrewd bit of business from Haas promoting him to team principal and moving Steiner on. I don't think they're going to be in the limelight as much as they were. Not that they were in it that much, but they were certainly with Drive to Survive. But it's a big couple of years. With Andretti sniffing around, a few other big manufacturers, Haas have really got to decide now, where do they want their team to be in the future? Most laps of anybody, which for them is unreal because they historically have terrible testing every single year. No sort of failures or issues, but the car doesn't look very quick. They had to get their race pace correct because that's what they struggled with most last year. They were great in quali, race pace was not good. From the time so far this year, race pace doesn't look good, quali pace doesn't look good. So the jury's out for that Haas team. I think that's the order though. Red Bull, certainly the team to beat. Let me know your thoughts from that winter testing session in the comments down below. I hope to be with you for every single Grand Prix so far this year for the first time since 2020. I'm looking forward to it. It's a pleasure to be back. It's a pleasure to see all of you in the comments down below. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.